Hello, this is your friendly nurse and health coach, and I'm coming to you today on the blood pressure, and the history of blood pressure. Your blood pressure is the force that's exerted by the blood when it presses against the blood vessels or the arteries of your heart. And reading is determined by the rate of your heartbeat, your strength of your heartbeat, and the amount of blood that passes through your blood vessels. So your blood pressure is very important, and it dates back and go all the way back. It go all the way back to the 1600th century when they first started with the blood pressure. They started experimenting on horses, and they had a glass tube and connected to a device and put it over the horse's leg, arteries on the horse's leg, to try to measure the blood pressure. And that's way back in the 1600s. And they would emphasize it on the left ventricle of the heart. They figured that blood was pressured against the arteries of the left ventricles in the heart mainly, so they was point toward that when they put it on the horse's leg to try to measure the blood pressure. And then it went to 1733 when an English clergyman began to first measure a blood pressure, and he effectively measured the blood pressure and the force of the blood against the arteries. And he said, we may have something here of the horse. They were still experimenting on the horse. And it came down to the 18th century. And they said, well, we're going to try it on people and see if we hear anything on the people with this glass component that they had made up to measure the pressure of the force of the blood going against the arteries. So they was affected in the 1800s, and a man named Thomas Young, he discovered there are some times that the blood pressure going up and times it going down when we are listening to the measure of the force of the pressure against the arteries. So he says something to this right here. So they set a limit of it shouldn't go over 160, the blood pressure. They said, well, we have the pressure of the arteries and the blood against the wall. We'll just let it go up to 160 maybe. But 160 started causing some problems because they said, wait, we've seen some problem with the kidneys when we run it up to 160, let it go up 160. Said something else going on here. So he saw that it was called a problem. Another man named Richard Bright worked with him and said that, yeah, it's a problem with it being 160 because it's causing a problem with their kidneys. And they said, well, something is definitely wrong. And so they said it got to the 1800s, and up in the 1800s they said, well, we're going to work a little more with the devices until we get to see what number it should be, because the pressure is building up on the artery walls and pushing the artery walls so much it's stretching the artery walls, and it's causing problems on other organs. And so they started with the mercury, putting the mercury in a device then, and this was the beginning of the 20th century. In the 1900s they began to put the mercury and calibrate it through the mercury in a glass tube in the mercury in the glass tube, and begin to calibrate the blood pressure that way. And that was the 1800s. I'm sorry, 1900s. By the end of the 1900s, the 20th century, they replaced it with electronic blood pressure devices. They put the electronics in it, and they began to also palpate the blood pressure. So they said, okay, maybe we can feel it more and pump this device up on the arm and feel it more and see how much pressure is forcing against the blood vessels. And so they decided, well, we better go for a little down from 160, because 160 is causing the blood pressure to really be high, and it's damaging the kidneys and some of the organs. So they came on down in 1925. They said it was lower in the female than the male. So they kept on discovering different things with the blood pressure. Around 1939, they discovered that the ratio of the mortality rate of death is more than the middle-aged people and the older people. And it was damaging their heart and their kidneys from it being so high, especially when they got up to 160. They said, wow, we can't let it get that high because it's damaging the heart and the kidneys. So they said, well, we got to put the rate down, that it can't be as high as like 140s they came to, because remember, the top part of the blood pressure is when the contraction of the arteries are taking place. That's the systolic blood pressure. And the systolic blood pressure is usually the fluid level in your body or your stress. The bottom part is when it's resting. That's the diastolic part of your blood pressure. And so they said, well, okay, more suicide people, their diastolic is higher than their systolic. They discovered that, and they said, wow, really something going on with the blood pressure, because the blood pressure is fluctuate between the male and the female, and people that's stressful. And then that's when they discovered, okay, it's got something also to do with the kidneys. So they started studying the kidneys, and they have found a lot more going on with the blood pressure. Is associated with the adrenal gland of the kidney, which is a stress hormone gland. That's sitting right on top of both kidneys. You got something called the adrenal gland, and an adrenal gland makes the stress hormone for your body. It's called aldosterone. And if that aldosterone started kicking out too much of the hormone of aldosterone, then your stress level go up, and making your blood pressure go up, especially the systolic part of your blood pressure. So they said, well, we're gonna have to set another rate for the normal blood pressure, because the stressful part is making the systolic, the top part of your blood pressure, going up. So they put the blood pressure, well, okay, normal 130 over 80 now. So the more stressful you get, the more that blood pressure go up. And it's got to do with the adrenal gland hormone that's secreted, aldosterone, from the adrenal glands that on top of both of your kidneys. They said, well, it's got to do with some of that. So this is the history of the blood pressure. They kept on, and they still experimenting with the blood pressure to this day. But they have found out that it is damaging the heart especially and the kidneys. And when you damage the heart and kidneys, guess what? You're going to have some damage to the lungs, your brain, and all your other organs in your body, because remember, the heart carries the blood, which is with oxygen in the blood, and we need oxygen in our body. You got your veins and your arteries. Your veins carrying the blood to the heart. Your arteries carrying the blood away from your heart. So you got those two main arteries and veins, and you got your capillaries, the little small micro veins, like capillaries, that's carrying your oxygen, proteins, your nutrients. So you got your capillaries, your arteries, and your veins doing work. And when anything interfere with the arteries, the veins, the capillaries, guess what? You're going to run into some big time problems. I had a privilege of working with experimental with blood pressure back in 2006 in Jacksonville, Florida, and they were sort of using me as a guinea pig and kept taking my blood pressure at certain times, and that's when they found out, well, it's got something to do with hormones. I was so, because I had just had a hysterectomy, and they said, well, it's got something to do with the hormones in the body, because you lose your hormone, the blood pressure have a tendency to go up. So there was an experiment with the fluid leverage in the body. It messed with the kidneys and your fluid level in your body when you don't have the proper hormones to secrete all this blood. You have to secrete all the blood around in your body for the oxygen flow to be level in all your systems and tissues in your body. You got to have that oxygen right for the blood cells and blood vessels to do what they need to do, because that's what's called stroke when it goes to your heart, and when it goes to your brain, you ain't got enough oxygen. You got stroke, aneurysm, blood and brain aneurysm, and a lot of stuff going on. So this is the history part of blood pressure, and they steady experiment on blood pressure to this day. But they have considered the kidneys and the adrenal gland, only both of the kidneys, to be one of the main problems why stress, and that's the stress hormone, the adrenal gland. And so they have determined that this is a main factor in blood pressure, kidneys. And there is a tendency, evidently, for Black Americans to have some kind of defect in their kidneys when they're born, and this leading to blood pressure problem. And there are millions of people with blood pressure problem, and the heart problems are the number one killer today is heart and stroke, and it's backed up by your blood pressure and what's going on with your blood pressure. Everybody need a blood pressure cuff in their house. If you got blood pressure, you need to be taking it every day or every other day, or you're on medication for blood pressure. You need a close walk, because it is called the silent killer. You don't know when your blood pressure up at times. You won't have no symptoms at times. Sometimes you may have symptoms, and sometimes you may not have symptoms. You may have a little nausea, a little headache, and you may not think that it's concerning your blood pressure. So you got a history of blood pressure, because it's the potential to be hereditary and in the genes. So if you got any kind of history of blood pressure, you need to be keeping a close walk on that blood pressure and what's going on with your blood pressure. And we are going to come back with more on the blood pressure. We love you. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. Put on that button that you know when we coming on, notification button, and stay tuned for more on high blood pressure. We love you.